when my stepfather said those cruel words to me, "You're not welcome here anymore." It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The house that I grew up in, the place that held memories of my late mother, was no longer a refuge. In that moment, I felt like an unwanted guest in my own life. He didn't even flinch, his cold, dismissive tone lingering in the air as he turned his back on me, walking away without another word. My heart shattered, but amidst the chaos of emotions swirling inside me, one thought began to take form. I won't let him destroy me. It wasn't always like this. After my father passed away, my mother remarried, and for a while I thought it was a second chance at happiness for both of us. My stepfather had seemed kind and supportive at first, helping my mother navigate the difficult years after Dad's death. But when she passed away too, something inside him changed. Or maybe he had always been this way, and I was just too naive to see it. He became distant, cruel even, especially toward me. It started with small things, remarks about how I was too old to still be living at home, how I was a burden now that my mother wasn't around. But I never imagined it would come to this, being outright told to leave the only home I had ever known. That night, I packed my bags in silence, holding back tears as I folded clothes and gathered keepsakes. Every corner of my room held pieces of my life, echoes of laughter, and whispers of comfort that now felt like ghosts. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. He had already made up his mind, and confronting him would only give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I channeled my pain into something else, a resolve to prove that I didn't need him, that I could rise above his pettiness and build a life of my own. The next day, I left with nothing more than a suitcase and a heart full of hurt. My stepfather didn't even bother to say goodbye. He simply pretended I didn't exist as I walked out the door. I had nowhere to go, no family to turn to. My friends tried to help, offering their couches and spare rooms, but I didn't want to burden anyone. I spent nights in cheap motels, rationing what little money I had saved. The loneliness was suffocating, and there were moments when I wondered if I had made a mistake by not standing up to him. But deep down, I knew this was the beginning of something bigger. I just didn't know what yet. I threw myself into finding a job, any job that would help me regain some sense of stability. It wasn't easy. The rejection emails piled up, each one chipping away at my confidence. But eventually, I got hired as a server at a small cafe. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay barely covered my expenses, but it was a start. The people there were kind, offering me a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in months. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my life from scratch. But even as I moved forward, I couldn't shake the bitterness I felt toward my stepfather. I didn't just want to move on. I wanted justice. He had taken away so much from me, not just materially, but emotionally. He had turned my home into a place of rejection and pain. I couldn't let him get away with it. So I started digging, looking into the legalities of the house, which had once belonged to my mother. She had always told me it would be mine someday, that it was her way of ensuring I'd always have a place to call home. But somehow, after her death, my stepfather had taken full control of the property. I needed to know how. I spent countless nights researching, poring over old documents, and trying to make sense of the legal jargon. It turned out that after my mother passed, my stepfather had quietly had her will contested, claiming he was entitled to the house as her surviving spouse. I hadn't known about it at the time. He had kept it all hidden, using my grief and inexperience against me. The realization made my blood boil, but it also fueled my determination. I wasn't going to let him get away with stealing what was rightfully mine. With the little money I had saved, I hired a lawyer to help me fight back. It was a risky move. I didn't have the funds for a prolonged legal battle, but I knew this was my only chance to reclaim what my mother had left for me. The process was grueling. My stepfather denied everything, painting himself as the victim and me as an ungrateful freeloader. He had no idea how much evidence I had gathered against him, from old conversations to financial records that didn't add up. As the case dragged on, I began to notice cracks in his facade. The man who had always seemed so confident, so untouchable, started to unravel under the weight of his lies. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, I stumbled upon something that turned the entire situation on its head. But that's a story for the next part. Stay tuned, because the twist is about to change everything. After weeks of battling through endless legal proceedings, the tension had reached its peak. My stepfather, once so smug and untouchable, now looked like a shadow of the man he used to be. The courtroom had exposed every one of his lies, his manipulative tactics, his efforts to steal what was never his, and the sheer cruelty with which he had treated me. But I knew the fight wasn't over. What came next would decide everything. As the case unfolded, my lawyer presented a discovery that no one, not even I, saw coming. While examining the house's legal documents, we found evidence of fraud buried deep within the paperwork my stepfather had submitted when he contested my mother's will. He had falsified signatures, including mine, in an attempt to gain full ownership of the property. The revelation felt like a punch to the gut, but it also became the game-changing piece of evidence we needed. The moment this was revealed in court, I could see the panic etched across his face. His bravado crumbled as the judge demanded an explanation. His lawyer fumbled, trying to spin some convoluted excuse, but it was too late. The evidence was damning, and everyone in the courtroom could see it. For the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand, like justice was finally within reach. But the twist didn't stop there. During the investigation, we uncovered something even more shocking. My stepfather had not only stolen the house, but also drained my late mother's savings account, funneling the money into investments under his name. The account had been meant for my future, something my mother had painstakingly saved over the years to ensure I'd have a safety net. He had stolen it all without a second thought. The betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined, but it also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. I was fighting for my mother's legacy. The court's final ruling was a victory I will never forget. The house was returned to me, and my stepfather was ordered to repay every cent he had stolen from my mother's savings. But perhaps the most satisfying part was watching the judge reprimand him for his actions, calling them a blatant abuse of trust and legal manipulation. In that moment, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. But what happened after the court ruling was even more powerful. Returning to the house wasn't just about reclaiming a property, it was about reclaiming my past, my memories, and my sense of belonging. I walked through the front door for the first time in months, feeling a surge of emotion as I stepped into the place where my mother's presence still lingered in every corner. I could almost hear her voice, her laughter, and her words of encouragement. The house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for, everything she had passed on to me. As for my stepfather, he had lost everything: the house, his reputation, and the false image of power he had clung to for so long. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was struggling to pay off the restitution order, forced to sell off his assets to cover his debts. For someone who had taken so much pride in his control over others, it was a fitting end. In the months that followed, I poured my energy into rebuilding the house and my life. I turned it into a home again, filled with love, laughter, and the spirit of my mother. I created a garden in her memory, planting flowers she loved and setting up a small bench where I could sit and feel connected to her. The pain and betrayal I had endured became a distant memory, replaced by a sense of pride in everything I had overcome. Looking back, I realized that my stepfather's cruelty had awakened something in me, a strength I didn't know I had. He thought his words, "You're not welcome here anymore," would break me. Instead, they became the catalyst for my transformation. I reclaimed what was mine, stood up for myself, and proved that even in the face of betrayal, you can find a way to rise again. My mother always told me, home isn't just a place, it's a feeling. Now, standing in the house she loved so much, surrounded by the memories we shared, I finally understood what she meant. I had found my home again, and this time no one could ever take it away from me.